tonight. I hate I missed last week. It's been a crazy couple of weeks for me. Are you guys able to see my screen okay? Okay, I see a thumbs up. I'm going to go ahead and let's see. I did this on Google Slides, so I don't usually use Google Slides. So let's see if I can figure out how to present. Give me just a second. Okay, I guess I have to toggle. All right. All right, you guys are still able to see, correct? All right. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my slides, and I won't be able to see you, but that's okay. But of course, I welcome if anyone ever wants to chime in. I entitled this little devotional just maybe your lion's den isn't about you. So in the course of my Bible reading, I'm reading one of the plans that you kind of read through chronologically in order. And so I was so excited to get out of the book of Ezekiel, and then it was Daniel. And I didn't realize Daniel was only 12 chapters long. And I feel like I read Daniel with fresh eyes. And I don't know, this kind of jumped out at me. And this is something that spoke to me in my devotion. So I thought I would share because chances are a lot of us are around the same age, same stage of life. Maybe it will, speak to you too. But I really enjoyed my reading in Daniel, and I was actually kind of disappointed when it was over. And I'm like, wait a minute, I need more. I need to know more stories about Daniel. So I'm going to start here, and I hope that I can convey kind of what I felt like God was speaking to me. So I'm going to start just with some of the facts about Daniel. I am later on going to talk about Daniel in the lion's den, hence the name of my title. But I wanted to start with some basic facts about Daniel. So Daniel, I think we all associate the name Daniel with the lion's den or the fiery furnace, or the dreamer, or if you've, been in church life a long time, end time prophecy, lots of scriptures go back to Daniel. But the book of Daniel is actually only 12 chapters long, so fairly short. And really the whole of Daniel's life was spent in Babylonian captivity, which I find this interesting. So I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like, especially in middle age, you feel like life is just one thing after another. And sometimes you just feel like, when does it get better? When do I have like a break? And, I thought about the excellence of Daniel, and Daniel repeatedly had highs and lows, but maintained that excellent character. And his entire book, he was actually in captivity. And in some ways, I feel like us living in the flesh on this earth is kind of similar. This world is not our home. We're looking to be set free and have our eternal home with Christ. So just kind of put that into perspective. All the excellence that Daniel did, he did it while he was a captive, a slave. So he was deported to Babylon from Judah when he was approximately 16 years old. I actually did a little bit of research and couldn't find an exact age, but we know he was fairly young. We know he's very intelligent. And so in Babylon, he was given the Babylonian name of Belteshazzar. His name was changed, but yet his identity wasn't. And so God had a purpose for Daniel in his captivity that I think we can glean something from. Another fun fact, 9 out of the 12 chapters in Daniel revolve around dreams. So he had the dream of, he had feet of brass, eyes of fire, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. We hear the story of Daniel prophesying to Belshazzar with the handwriting on the wall. So lots of dreams and imagery revolving the life of Daniel. He was a prophet. Another really interesting fact that I found was, out of the 2,900 plus Bible characters in the Bible, Daniel is one of the few well-known characters about whom nothing negative is ever written. And I love the fact that the Bible does include people's faults and failures because it gives us hope. But think about this. That's a pretty significant fact. We don't hear about him losing his temper like Moses. We don't hear about him falling into moral sin like David. All great men in the Bible, but nothing negative is written in that entire book about this man. And I think that's very significant and commendable. And then this last bullet point really reflects and turns our attention to the episode in the lion's den. So during the reign of King Darius, of course, Darius had to fulfill his own decree, and Daniel had to go to the lion's den, even though Darius didn't want him to go to the lion's den. And at that time, that would have put Daniel at about 80 some odd years old. So I think that's interesting. You grow up going to Sunday school and you think, you see these cute little flannel graph stories, or now you see it on a screen of these cute little lion cubs and little Daniel in the lion's den. But, Daniel would have been an older man at this point. He would have been physically frail, and yet excellence all the way around. Let me go to my next slide here. So again, if I could summarize the life of Daniel, it would be really summarized by a life of faith, a life of prayer. He had courage. He was consistent in his beliefs. He was consistent in his behaviors. And he didn't compromise for what he believed in, even when the stakes are high. So after reading about Daniel, I thought, wow, God, help me to be like Daniel. I don't think I've ever prayed that before, but help me to have that kind of integrity that when the stakes are high, that I trust in my God and I stand upon that, no matter what comes my way. All right, let me get to my next slide here. So I'm going to go through a couple of the stories, and before I read a lengthy passage of scripture. So the first story that we read about in Daniel chapter 8, and if any of you have ever been on a Daniel fast, this is where that term comes from. So again, Daniel's exemplary behavior made him stood out. And because of that, he was elevated and he was given more authority. And I just want to say before I talk about this story, there's a lot of parallels with Joseph in the Old Testament and Daniel. They were both dreamers, had the ability to interpret dreams, and they both had what I would call extreme highs and lows. Joseph was in the pit, and then he was elevated to Potiphar's house. Then he's in the prison. Then he's back into Pharaoh's house. And we see the same thing with Daniel. He purposes in his heart in Daniel 1:8 that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. And we find, you guys know that story. After 21 days, they compared Daniel and his, cronies or his circle. And they were basically eating pulse and a vegetarian diet. And in verse 20, it says, in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all of the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. Now, was that the food? No, that was God's favor. That was God recognizing these men are setting apart and will not defile themselves with the king's meat. So we see this beginning of excellence. And of course, people want to crucify, well, not crucify, but, they don't like that. They don't like that excellent spirit. Sometimes when we try to do the right thing, we might notice in our own life, people come against us because they see that good character and fight against that. The next story we read about in Daniel chapter 3. So, there's a decree. Nebuchadnezzar puts out a decree that anyone who doesn't worship the graven image is going to be cast into the burning fiery furnace. And this picture, this is one of your Sunday school pictures for you here. And this just makes me laugh because I don't know about you, but if I'm in a fiery trial, I'm probably not looking like this. My hair is probably on end, and I'm definitely not walking calmly with a nice little smile on my face. But, we know that story. Were the men burned? Absolutely not. Not only were they not burned, there was a testimony. And this is kind of where I want to start as we kind of go into the lion's den. So these men, this was a terrible thing for them to go through. This was scary. It was hard. And even though they came out, I want you to think about how it must have felt knowing you've disobeyed the king and you're going to be placed in a very difficult place. So just because they came out unscathed doesn't mean this wasn't hard for them. But the second thing I want to point out is we know that there was a fourth man in the fire. And we know that it was someone on the outside who saw that fourth man in the fire, right? And so that's going to be important. And just like I kind of talked about the Daniel in the lion's den, for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I don't think the fire was really for them. It was really for the person on the outside. So I want to kind of lead into Daniel in the lion's den with that. And then, of course, here's your pretty Sunday school churchified version. You're in the lion's den. You know, the animals are purring softly. This is not how it was for Daniel. First of all, Daniel was not a boy. He was an old man. Probably couldn't even get out of the pit if he tried or had a ladder. And these animals, we know that God did shut their mouth, but don't you think that whole nighttime that he was in there, I'm sure he trusted God, but I'm sure part of that prayer was, God, if it's my time to go, you got me. You know, so he was in there through no fault of his own. He didn't do something, it wasn't a punishment for a crime. He wasn't a sinner. There's nothing he did to deserve to be placed in the lion's den, but yet God had a bigger plan in this story. And that's kind of what I want to point out. So this story, it's not really about Daniel. Here we are in this, I think this is Daniel chapter 6 when we read about him being in the lion's den. So it's only 12 chapters, the entire book of Daniel. So here in the first 6 chapters, we see he's already shown his excellence, his character, his faithfulness. That's never a question. This is not a test like Abraham surrendering Isaac. This is Daniel surrendered. This is not about this trial that he's placed in. I don't think it's really about him. He's already proven his faithfulness. But what could it possibly be about? That's what I'm going to kind of go into next. And this is kind of what I thought when I went through these scriptures. So it is a little bit lengthy, but I do want to read it because what's a Bible study without reading the word, right? But not only that, there's a couple of things that really stuck out to me, and I want to kind of emphasize those things. So in chapter 6, it says, it pleased Darius, who was the king, to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one. So Daniel was elevated. And keep in mind, God never elevates you just so you can live a bigger and better life. He's always elevating you for a higher purpose. It's not all about you. We like to sometimes think, oh, enlarge my borders. Let me pray the prayer of Jabez. God never does that. He elevates you and puts you in position because he's increasing your capacity. And that sometimes comes with hard things. So in verse 2, it says, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. So he was in an important position. He's in a high position politically, even though he's a slave. So in verse 3, then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. Where did that spirit come from? It came from God. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Doesn't that sound a lot like Joseph? Joseph was given all of, he was next in line after the Pharaoh. So God exalts, God puts us in positions sometimes, and he enlarges us, but it's for a greater purpose. And we have to realize when those trials come, sometimes it's about the greater purpose and not about us not being faithful or not making good decisions. So in verse 4, so the governors and satraps, of course, they don't like this. They sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they couldn't find anything because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So he did everything with such integrity that the only thing they could pin him on was he's not going to bow down to a graven image, or he's not going to bow down to the king or deny the Israeli God. So in verse 6, so these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and the satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king. You see how they're like really egoing up Darius. They said, whoever won't, honor you shall be cast to the den of lions. So they're setting the trap for him. And now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius, of course, his ego's all puffed up. He's like, oh, okay, I'll sign this. This sounds pretty good. So we're going to read on further. Verse 10, so when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he sees the trap and he goes home. And I just love this. He continues in his integrity. He doesn't freak out. He doesn't call for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego immediately and start complaining. But he goes and in his upper room with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since the early days. He wasn't going to bow down to that fear that they're going to kill me or put me in the lion's den. So the men, of course, find Daniel in verse 11, and then they go back to the king and, of course, saying, you sign this decree, you have to follow through with it, you cannot change it. And so we see in verse 12, the king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which doesn't alter. In verse 13, so they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is the one of the captives from Judah, doesn't show regard for you. He's the one who's not bowing down, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. So that they're essentially, narking on Daniel, saying Daniel's not following the decree. He's praying to his own God. And when the king heard these words in verse 14, he was greatly displeased with himself. Because you know what? The king's heart, he valued Daniel. He saw Daniel's potential. He didn't want to put Daniel in the lion's den. And so he was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. So the king is like, how can I get out of this? I can't change it. I don't want Daniel to go to the lion's den. And so again, they reiterate this law cannot be changed. And so what I want you to start thinking about, I want you to see how Daniel going to this lion's den is going to minister to King Darius. This lion's den, it isn't for Daniel. Daniel's already proven his faithfulness, his integrity. This is for Darius. And so Darius is going to see, and there's going to be a big redemption that follows. So as we go to our next slide, so the king gives the command. They brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. And listen to this. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, your God, think about that, your God, not my God, your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. He's already speaking some, which you can almost hear that hope in his words of, your God's going to deliver you. Like, I want this to be true. King Darius wants this to be true. And so the stone was laid on the mouth of the den. The king sealed it because he had to. And, he couldn't change it. The law was the law. So then we look in verse 18. The king is not happy about this. He goes back to his palace and he spends the night fasting. No musicians were brought to him. His sleep went from him. He couldn't sleep. He was troubled. And I think it's interesting. He kind of pulled a Daniel there. He went and fasted. He was visibly grieved about what was happening. And so he rises up early in the morning and he's like, okay, I got to go to the lion's den. I've got to see if his God saved him. And when he comes to the den, he cries out with a lamenting voice, Daniel, Daniel, did you make it? Are you okay? He wants him to make it. And he says, Daniel, servant of the living God, look at that sentence, servant of the living God. He does say in the next part, has your God, whom you continually serve, continually been able to deliver you. But the fact that he says Daniel, servant of the living God, I feel like there's a shift there. He's already saying there's something to this God of Daniel, and I want to know more. And then Daniel says the most relieving words to Darius. He says, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I haven't done anything wrong before you." And so Daniel's name is cleared. And so in verse 23, now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury was found because he believed in his God. I'm going to go to my next slide. And so, of course, you guys know the decree, and they had the people who came up with the accusers were placed in the den. Of course, then it was a feeding frenzy for those lions, and we know what happened. But I want to point out the end of this chapter. In verse 25, King Darius writes, and remember, he has a lot of power and authority, and he writes, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. Can you believe that? Can you imagine if this happened in our world, in our country? He's making a decree. This is the true God, and he's got the authority to do this. And now look how Darius, Daniel's God, Darius now knows Daniel's God for himself. And he says, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And so what I want you to think about is, in this story, again, Daniel was unscathed. He came out unharmed, but history was completely changed. And so the emancipation of the Jews under Darius, and you can read about this in history books, and it's documented in some of the other Old Testament books of the Bible. It was during the reign of King Darius that the work resumed of rebuilding the temple in Jerusalem. And not only did he want the temple rebuilt, but we see in Ezra, and you can see I've got it bolded on my slide here, that Darius issued another decree, not only affirming the right for them to rebuild the temple, but also to provide the resources for the construction. Is that not something? And so he says, I hereby decree that you do this for these Jewish elders in the construction of this house of God. The expenses are to be fully paid to these men from the royal treasury, from the revenues of Trans-Euphrates, so that the work will not stop. And so lastly, as we kind of think about this, Darius's reign, we've gone from Babylonian captivity, where during Darius's reign, we see restoration of worship and religious identity in Jerusalem. That, in my mind, happened because of Daniel. Darius was able to see through Daniel, and looking at Daniel's life, he was able to know the God of Daniel. And so sometimes you might feel like you're in a lion's den. I know we've all probably compared ourselves to Job one time, even though we have absolutely no reason to do that. We're like, oh my God, I feel like Job. Like we compare ourselves to Bible stories, at least I do, and I'm sure a lot of people do. But you might feel like you're in a fiery trial, but maybe the trial is not about you being faithful enough or you did something to deserve it. Maybe it's for people on the outside of your lives that are watching you, and they're watching you in that den, and they're waiting to see, will your God deliver you? And not only that, restoration and redemption is the heartbeat of God's word. Let's go back to Joseph. When Joseph was in captivity and sold, what was the final outcome? He was in Egypt for a reason. He was placed in Egypt so he could deliver his family and the Israelites and provide food during famine. Look at Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ came, and look at what he told Mary. When the angel came and told Mary, "You're blessed and highly favored." She didn't feel blessed and highly favored when they were crucifying her son. But what was the outcome? Redemption, redemption, redemption. And we see this same story here. Daniel, he just lived an excellent life and a life of integrity. But it doesn't mean, I think sometimes as Christians, we think we do buy a little bit into the prosperity gospel. Like, I'm trying to live my life right. Why is everything going wrong? Like, I'm doing all the things right. God, aren't you a little quid pro quo here? But God's like, I got something way bigger scale than you even think. So if you're going through something, or when you go through something, think about, maybe there's a lesson in it for you. Maybe God is trying to teach you. Maybe God is trying to refine you. But could it be that God is working in others through your situations? And that's what I felt like God was speaking to me. Like, Daniel went through some stuff. He went through some hard trials, but it really was for a purpose. It was for God's kingdom purpose and an eternal purpose. And so sometimes I think when we can put things into perspective, at least I know for me, it helps me to pace myself in this marathon of living for God and trying to live a spiritual life and trying to do the right things and not grow weary in well-doing. So that's my thought for you today, that not all of our trials are about us. Sometimes it's about the people who are watching us and the work that God is doing that's bigger and broader outside of each of our lives. And that's all I have.
I asked a question. Okay, Pastor preached about David, how he was the man from his own heart. But Daniel, like you just made us aware of, had no faults, had no.
Well, he had faults.
Sin. I mean, no sin represented as high as David.
He has faults, but they're just not published in the Bible.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he had them, but I think it's significant that we don't hear about his faults.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was human. He was human.
Yeah,
so other than Jesus Christ, we all got some sin bags.
Yeah, I'm saying, but there's something to a point well taken. But David was pretty something, but his man from his own heart. I mean, I understand that's God's choice, but it's just something that you point that out. And he was
I just looked at that and I thought, Lord, help me be like that.
That is true. Well, you read over stuff, you don't see stuff. That was so good. Thank you, Sister Beverly.
Oh, you're welcome.
So that just kind of like to segue into something you just said, was that if other people are watching how we handle our trials, what are they seeing about our faith? I have to tell y'all, I was raising the twins and everything, and I had a friend that was near my age, and she was trying to get pregnant for her second child, and she said, I just begged God not to give me twins. Well, that says a lot about how I handled my trial, doesn't it? It's like, oh, don't serve God. I mean, look at what he let her go through and how she didn't handle it well. So it is important that we take inventory about the people that are nearest and how they see us handling our situation. I mean, not everybody around us is like a child of God. And so it's important that they don't see us as, well, God's got us, we're up underneath his thumb and he's just putting the screw to us. It's really tough for us. This is how our God handles things. That's not true at all, so this is a very good message. Anybody else want to say something?
Very good. I enjoyed it. It was something I needed to hear. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Very good.
That was a blessing, Sister Beverly. I never ever saw it in that light. But of course, you just can't deny, what came out of this tonight, knowing that when you go through something, it may not even be for you. My God, for it could be the onlooker or someone in the family, and you just wonder why. It just seems like you're always in that fire. But thank you so much.
When I think too, since I know a lot of us pray for our adult children, sometimes I think, God, are you allowing this because my adult child needs to see how I handle things? Are you growing something in her? And so I think too, you just can never underestimate. We don't know how God is working. And I think for those of us who pray for our adult children and worry about our adult children, you just don't know. God is using your story and really impacting them, I believe, with our stories.
And that is so true. This evening I sat down and my little grandson watching these little video games on his phone, and there's so much things that is they're using to infiltrate these young minds. And there's a little it's not a cartoon, it's cartoon characters, but little boys and girls, and they're talking about God, and the one of the characters said God is not real, and my grandson just immediately, what are you talking about? That's not true. God is real. And let me tell you something that I just had to say, that's so good. And I just thank God, because he just snapped at it, and said, what you talking about? And God is real. What you talking about? And it takes, you don't know who is looking and who is watching and what they're learning, because what does he really know? He doesn't have the experience, but it's a life, that he's seen, that is lived around him, that he can say that. And I really bless God for that. So yeah, the fire is really, or whatever we go through is just for others to see.
I wanted to say something. James says, count it all joy for the trials and temptations or trials that you go through or whatever. But he goes on to say, if any of you lack wisdom, ask it. And so when my husband lost his job, he and 8 others, there was 9 of them total out of his department, were just laid off because they were getting rid of the department just in one day. And I asked the Lord, I was like, what is going on? And I had the understanding that the trial we were going through wasn't necessarily for me. Would I grow? Yes, I would grow, because I had to learn that God is my provider, not my husband. But it was to get my husband's attention and, to get the distractions out of his life and focus on God. And we were a whole lot better for that, going through that together. But if I had gotten out of alignment, like I'd been the one that was complaining so much, or pushing him to get a job, or being contentious with him because of the situation we were in, or just go get a job and become the provider and usurp his authority and all. If I'd done that, I'd have been so out of alignment, with what God's purpose was, and also with the purpose of my husband, because he was really supposed to be the one that God was trying to. God wanted me to provide like a soft place for him to land. And if I'm like contentious and angry and all this, trying to go to work and expecting the kids to be homeschooled and expecting dinner on the table from a husband that's never had to do that, it would have just caused more division, more anger, more disunity, and we would never have gotten what we were supposed to get out of that trial. So it's important that we do ask wisdom. Why am I going through this? Because once you understand that it really isn't all about you, it becomes a whole lot easier to go through it, because you have this expectation there's some good things that are going to happen out of this. There's some good things that are going to happen out of this. I remember talking to the marketing director, one of the marketing people at Pace at Home, just as we were going into the pandemic. And he had such a great attitude. He said, I can't wait to hear the stories of humanity and how they just came through this whole issue with just the stories of great human effort and kindness and love and all those things. And really so many people shined. Think about all the healthcare workers that shined in that moment. And It was a very terrible trial, but what came out of it was a lot of gold nuggets. So, it is so important. Ask God for wisdom. Give him, he gives it liberally. He doesn't withhold it. He will give you wisdom. And once you have that understanding, wait a minute, this is not all about me. And if I make it all about me, then I'm going to really mess this up. Because I think Daniel, it's like Beverly said, he went in there, he knew it wasn't about him. He knew either way he was going to win, right? But he really wanted others to be just as sold out on his God as he was. So that is so good, Beverly. It's really good.
Yes, indeed. And I just want to testify to the last statement that I was going to a difficult trial and I didn't know the outcome at that time. And I was taking a shower and I felt that the Lord is speaking to me, that he will use that to benefit other people. And the Lord indeed gave me the victory in that trial. And I believe that he did that.
Yeah, right. That's good. That's very good. Anybody else? I really love this. This is good. Because if you're not going through a trial now, just hang on. You'll go through something.
That's what I was going to say,
Ernestine?
because it's been very interesting with the new position. And, I always ask myself, Lord, what are you trying to teach me? But I think this message was right on point, because we're supposed to be the light. We're supposed to be that testimony. And it's going to take some time for people that I don't know to recognize that, hey, God's in control of everything. You got new management, new position, new people that you're working with. You have to keep in perspective, like you said, Sister Beverly, everything is for purpose. And so in order to be that living testimony, in order to bring God to the forefront of our lives, we got to recognize it's not just about us, it is about others, because you never know what you're going through. People see that you're going through things and they're in the midst of it as well. Their eyes are on you because you are the light, because you should be standing out. So this is really good. It helped me to recognize that I still got to remain humble. I still have to recognize that I'm going through the fire. I'm going to get something out of everything that we're going through at work. But my coworkers, I pray that, that it either leads to salvation or increased faith in their lives or what have you. So, because we're all going through the fire together, we all got to get something out of it together as well. So thanks, Sister Beverly.
That's good, Ernestine. Ernestine's having to put
Thank
into
you.
practice access denied. Access denied.
Yes.
That's good. Welcome, Carol. We saw you popped in. Good to see you. And
Thank
Jackie,
you.
I think she came in too. Jacqueline, it's good to see you.
Good to
This is
be
very
here.
good. Yeah.
It was a great message. I agree that I can think of my adult children. In fact, as I'm a part of here, I just got a text from one of my family members that because something happened and I didn't take sides. I really let God, I felt I had to let God speak through me. And I just got a text saying that they're very appreciative of my support, that she appreciated me a lot. And that was God. So, yeah, and I didn't feel good about the situation at all. But I gave it to God. And when we give things to God, He takes care of it, doesn't He?
He always does. He always does. That's
So it was
good.
very good, Beverly. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's not all about me,
No, it's not all about me either. Sometimes I personalize so many things and I shouldn't. I just shouldn't. It's not all about me. But ask God for wisdom. He will give you that. He will show you, and it'll take the sting out of some of the stuff that you're going
Oh,
through.
yeah.
It really will. Because you realize, wait a minute, that's not necessary. I'm not the primary person being disciplined. Yes, I will learn something, but I'm not the primary one that's been being disciplined. So, but sometimes it takes those trials to teach us.
Mhm.
So anyway,
Or they're just watching you. They do. They
yeah,
watch you. And you know, they don't even realize it. I think sometimes they're testing you and they don't even know they're testing you.
yeah, I agree. I agree. I had that too going on in my family. Yes. Well,
Yeah, sometimes like you know, you could stop pushing the button any day now.
yeah, right,
But yeah.
right, right. This has been very good. All right. Well, it's after 8, but I love you guys all so very
You
Um,
much.
too.
I'm
love
so
you
Love
ladies.
you, love you,
Good
ladies.
night.
Yeah.
Have a
love
good
you
Thank
night,
guys.
you.
Have
guys.
a
Good
good
night.
night.
See you
Enjoy
Good
later.
night,
the rest of
everybody.